The mansion's grand ballroom stretched before me like a bizarre painting come to life, every inch dripping with opulence, so thick it practically oozed off the gilded walls and crystal chandeliers. The guests flowed through the room in waves, each wave more extravagant than the last, draped in sequins, silk, and the kind of jewelry that would make even the most hardened jewel thief blush. I found myself planted near the sweeping staircase on the far side, a vantage point perfect for people watching, which was rapidly becoming my preferred pastime amid the chaos. I watched as a trio of women swept past, their laughter tinkling like distant bells, perfectly timed and pitched to convey effortless charm. Their smiles were sharp, flashing teeth, more like weapons than expressions of joy. They were the social sharks of this glittering sea, patrolling the waters with practiced poise. I could practically hear the unspoken calculations behind each glance and tilt of the head, alliances formed and broken in the blink of an eye, reputations crafted and destroyed with a single whispered word. It was like watching a bizarre dance where everyone knew the steps except me. I, in my paint-speckled clothes and nervous smile, was the reluctant outsider, the accidental security guard caught in a masquerade I barely understood. From my spot, I noticed Mrs. Penelope Wexley making her entrance, as flamboyant as ever. She swept through the crowd like a peacock in full display, glittering with every step. Her gown shimmered with sequins that caught the light and threw it back in 1,000 directions, while her necklace clinked melodiously with each exaggerated gesture. She spotted me almost immediately, her eyes gleaming with the promise of gossip.
"Ellie, darling!"
she purred, sidling up with the grace of a cat and the volume of a brass band. "Have you seen the latest scandal? It's simply delicious. The way those two fools tried to outwit each other, it's like a soap opera writ large." She leaned in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, though her tone was anything but subtle. "You simply must keep your ears open tonight. There's more than one secret hiding behind these polished smiles." I smiled weakly, nodding as I tried to process the torrent of information. Mrs. Wexley was both a blessing and a curse. Her gossip often led me into trouble, but was also the thread I needed to pull at the tangled web of this society. Just then, Jasper Quinn approached, his stocky frame cutting through the crowd like a boulder through silk. His stern face was set in a frown so deep it could have been carved from stone. He stopped beside me, lowering his voice to a growl. "Ellie, I've been watching Maximilian. He's not just here for the party. He's moving through the guests with an agenda, something calculated." I nodded, grateful for the rare moment of alliance amid the swirling mistrust. "I've noticed. It's like he's playing everyone like pieces on a chessboard. But I think he's underestimated how chaotic this game can get." Jasper cracked a rare, tight-lipped smile. "Then maybe we've got a chance." As we spoke, Maximilian Crane glided through the crowd, the very picture of suave menace. His tailored suit hugged his tall frame perfectly, every stitch a statement of power and control. His smile was a razor disguised as charm, and his sharp eyes flicked around the room, missing nothing. Under the glittering chandeliers, he was a predator in his element, moving with the confidence of a man who believed the world was his stage and everyone else merely actors in his play. I swallowed hard, the absurdity of my situation crashing down with sudden clarity. Here I was, a broke art student masquerading as security, standing toe-to-toe with billionaires and thieves, caught in a farce that was somehow more real than anything I'd ever painted. But beneath the slapstick mishaps and mistaken identities lay something raw and honest, the desperate human need to be seen, to belong, to matter. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. If I was going to survive this night, and maybe even come out the other side with my dignity intact, I needed to see through the glitter and pretense. The gallery of faces before me was not just a crowd. It was a living, breathing satire of wealth and power, each smile a mask hiding fears and ambitions. And I was going to unmask them all. With that thought, I stepped away from the staircase, moving deeper into the swirling sea of guests, ready to play my part in the final act of this absurd comedy. The night was far from over, and the gallery of faces was waiting. "Ellie, you look like you were about to faint," Mrs. Wexley teased as she caught up to me again, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I'm just absorbing the scenery," I replied, trying to sound casual while my heart hammered in my chest. "Absorbing? Darling, you read more like a sponge ready to burst. But trust me, the best stories come from those who watch quietly and strike when no one's looking." Her words settled in my mind, a challenge and a comfort all at once. As I glanced around, I realized she was right. This night was a performance, and I was both audience and actor. The question was, could I rewrite the script before the final curtain? I caught Jasper's eye across the room, the unspoken message clear: it was time to act. And for once, I wasn't just the clumsy girl pretending to be security, I was the unlikely heroine ready to take on the absurdity of it all. The gallery of faces might have been a stage, but I was determined to steal the show. The chandeliers above cast fractured rainbows across the polished floors, reflecting the myriad expressions of the guests, some genuine, most carefully crafted. I moved with purpose now, watching, listening, piecing together the puzzle of this glittering world. Every laugh, every whispered exchange, every sidelong glance was a brushstroke painting a picture of human folly and ambition. And somewhere in this painted chaos, the real thief waited, unaware that the girl they'd dismissed as a mere shadow was about to bring the whole performance crashing down. The night was far from over, and for once I was ready for whatever came next. The mansion's atmosphere thickened like a stew left unattended too long. Somewhere between the polished marble and the echoing laughter, Maximilian Crane's influence tightened its grip, and the stakes were getting higher by the minute. It was clear now, the thief wasn't going to be caught by accident or by bumbling security alone. Ellie Harper stood in the cramped security room, a makeshift command center that smelled faintly of stale coffee and desperation. The walls were plastered with monitors flickering images of the gala's various rooms, entrances, and corridors. Jasper Quinn, the head of security, was already there, his arms crossed, his face a mask of concentration that barely hid the twitch of impatience. "We've got to assume Maximilian's got eyes everywhere," Jasper muttered, pointing at the screens with a stubby finger. "He's not just sitting pretty. He's set traps, and those accomplices of his are lurking like shadows." Ellie swallowed her nerves and leaned over the table where a crudely drawn map of the mansion was spread out. "What kind of traps?" "Motion sensors, pressure plates near key exits, silent alarms, some tech we didn't even know was here. And the guests. Collateral damage," Jasper said grimly. Ellie's mind raced. She wasn't a security expert, but she was an art student with a knack for improvisation. And she was starting to see the gala for the absurd theater it was, a stage where everyone played a part, and she was desperately trying to rewrite her script. "Then we have to be unpredictable," she said, a spark of resolve lighting her eyes. "Use the chaos to our advantage. Trap the trapper." Jasper raised an eyebrow but nodded slowly. "All right, but we need distractions, diversions, something to draw Maximilian's eyes away from us." Ellie grinned, the first genuine smile she'd managed all evening. "Leave that to me." Meanwhile, across the glittering ballroom, Maximilian Crane was the picture of calm confidence. Tall and impeccably dressed in a suit that cost more than Ellie's rent, he surveyed the room with a sly smile that didn't quite reach his sharp eyes. The priceless pocket watch rested securely in the inner pocket of his jacket, a trophy and a weapon in one. He signaled subtly to his accomplices, a trio of nervous men who moved awkwardly through the crowd, setting subtle traps near exits and corridors. A misplaced vase here, a slightly ajar door, their little annoyances designed to trip up any would-be pursuers. Back in the security room, Ellie was already plotting her first move. She slipped out with a headset Jasper reluctantly handed her, muttering instructions to keep calm and stick to the plan. But calm was not her forte. Her first attempt at blending in as security was, predictably, a disaster. As she patrolled a corridor near the grand ballroom, she accidentally brushed against a decorative panel, triggering a hidden alarm. The sudden blare startled her so much she stumbled backwards, knocking into a stand of helium balloons. The balloons burst into the air with a ridiculous squeak, floating into the chandelier above. Gasps and laughter erupted from nearby guests as the unexpected spectacle momentarily broke the tension. Ellie flushed crimson, muttering apologies as she tried to regain her composure. "Well," Jasper's voice crackled in her earpiece, "at least you've got their attention." Distracted, not detained, Ellie replied, her voice tinged with humor despite her embarrassment. Using the momentary chaos, Ellie and Jasper coordinated their movements. They ducked into shadowy corridors, whispering plans and exchanging wry quips that eased the tension. Jasper's gruff exterior softened as Ellie's quick wit and observational skills became clear. "You know," Jasper admitted, "you're not as hopeless as I thought." "Flattery will get you nowhere," Ellie shot back with a smirk. They navigated the maze of halls, carefully avoiding traps and watching for Maximilian's accomplices. Ellie's awkwardness was still on full display, tripping over a loose rug here, barely catching herself on a velvet curtain there, but her determination was infectious. Between whispered strategizing and slapstick missteps, they began to close in on the thief's movements. Ellie's artistic eye caught details others missed, a scuff mark on the floor indicating a hurried escape route, a faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in a seemingly empty room. As they pieced together Maximilian's plan, the absurdity of the gala's social pageantry became all the more apparent. Here were people obsessed with appearances, while behind the scenes a desperate chase was unfolding, a farce worthy of a satirical painting. Yet beneath the comedy, Ellie felt a surge of confidence. The nervous girl who had arrived hoping only to survive the night was becoming a player in this chaotic game. And the game was far from over. "Ready for the next move?" Jasper asked, his tone serious but with a hint of grudging respect. Ellie nodded, her eyes sparkling with mischief and resolve. "Let's turn the tables." The night was thick with possibility, and the mansion's walls seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see who would make the next move in this twisted dance of plans within plans. The gala's opulence, with its glittering chandeliers and hushed whispers, had been both a dazzling spectacle and a suffocating cage for me. Just a few hours ago, I was a nervous art student, a ghost in paint-splattered clothes lost among the polished elites. Now, crouched behind a towering velvet curtain, I felt the pulse of the night beneath my skin, a rhythmic tension that throbbed louder with every breath I took. From my concealed vantage point, my eyes locked onto a figure moving stealthily near the grand staircase. The man was unremarkable at first glance, nondescript in a dark suit that blended seamlessly into the shadows, but there was something frenetic about his movements. His hands fumbled with a small metallic device that clinked faintly, a sound easily masked by the orchestra's soothing strains. The irony wasn't lost on me. In a room filled with carefully curated appearances, here was someone trying to manipulate the unseen, the backstage machinery of this glittering social theater. "Jasper," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the murmur of guests and the swish of expensive fabrics. He was nearby, his stocky frame tense, eyes sharp as ever. I saw him nod subtly, understanding the gravity of what I'd spotted. The head of security and I, an unlikely duo bound by circumstance, now shared a silent mission to expose this hidden threat before it unraveled everything. The man's nervousness was palpable. He glanced around frequently, his shifty eyes reflecting the chandelier's sparkle as he tried to avoid notice. I could almost hear his heartbeat pounding against the quiet elegance of the evening. Suddenly, his foot caught on the edge of a Persian rug, sending a small metal box tumbling to the floor with a clatter that cut through the music like a gunshot. Heads turned, conversations faltered, and Maximilian Crane's piercing gaze snapped toward the disturbance. A cold thrill ran down my spine. This was the moment, the fragile thread on which the entire night's chaos hung. I straightened, swallowing the lump of panic that tried to rise in my throat, and stepped from the shadows. The room seemed to tilt, the glittering faces blurring into a single, expectant crowd. My paint-splattered clothes felt heavier somehow, a badge of all I had endured and learned tonight. "Caught you," I said, voice steadier than I'd expected. The accomplice's eyes widened, and Maximilian's sly smile faltered for the first time. The network he had so meticulously woven was beginning to unravel, and I was at the center of the fray, no longer a timid outsider, but a player in this absurd game of wealth, power, and deception. Jasper moved quickly, stepping beside me, his presence reassuring. Together, we confronted the accomplice, whose attempts at escape were clumsy, betraying nerves that mirrored my own not long ago. The crowd's murmurs swelled, the social satire unfolding in real time as the high and mighty watched a chaotic comedy of errors play out before them. In that moment, I realized how far I'd come. The nervous girl who had arrived hoping for distraction and inspiration had found a strange sort of confidence amid the madness. The unseen observer was now seen, her voice heard, her courage undeniable. Yet, as the night edged closer to its inevitable climax, I couldn't shake the question lingering in my mind: how much of this newfound confidence was real, and how much was just another mask in the endless masquerade of social roles? The answer, I suspected, would reveal itself only when the final act unfolded, and when the true nature of heroism and folly blurred into one. With a deep breath, I prepared for whatever chaos lay ahead, knowing that this night, this unlikely adventure had already changed me forever. The grand ballroom, usually a temple of polished elegance and hushed whispers, had transformed into something resembling a slapstick battleground. Ellie Harper found herself at the epicenter of the chaos, a vortex of unintended consequences swirling around her. It began with a simple misstep. Her foot caught on the edge of an ornately embroidered tablecloth, sending a cluster of crystal glasses into a symphony of shattering melody. Champagne sprayed in glittering arcs, sparkling against the golden chandeliers like a burst of liquid fireworks. Gasps rippled through the crowd, mingling with nervous laughter as guests scrambled to avoid the tidal wave of spilled luxury. Ellie's face flushed crimson as she tried to steady herself, but the damage was done. The domino effect unfolded with the inevitability of a well-rehearsed comedy. A startled gentleman flailed wildly, knocking into a lady whose flowing gown swept across the floor like a rogue sail. She, in turn, collided with a waiter juggling a tray of canapes, which flew skyward in a graceful arc before crashing onto the polished marble tiles. The cacophony of clattering glass, muffled curses, and exasperated sighs filled the room, turning the gala into an impromptu vaudeville act. Through the commotion, Maximilian Crane attempted to slip away, his tailored suit a beacon of composure in the storm of disorder. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. His progress was abruptly halted when one of Mrs. Penelope Wexley's extravagant gowns, adorned with enough sequins to blind a small village, caught on a decorative curtain. The silk fabric tore with a theatrical rip, ensnaring Maximilian in a web of glittering disaster. His usual sly smile faltered, replaced by a grimace of frustration as he struggled to free himself, muttering under his breath. Nearby guests, bewildered by the spectacle, exchanged amused glances and stifled chuckles. Mrs. Wexley herself was oblivious to the chaos she was causing, deeply engaged in a lively conversation about the latest scandal with a cluster of equally flamboyant socialites. Her booming voice echoed off the marble walls, carrying gossip and innuendo that seemed to have a magnetic effect on the party's more anxious attendees. In her exuberance, she inadvertently blocked a narrow corridor that served as a secret passage for Maximilian's accomplices. One hapless conspirator, caught mid-sneak, stumbled over the hem of her gown and dropped a small, shiny object, a clue that could unravel the entire scheme. The clatter of the item hitting the floor was lost in the general uproar, yet it did not go unnoticed by Ellie. whose keen eyes caught the glint. Meanwhile, Jasper Quinn maneuvered through the pandemonium with practiced efficiency, his stocky frame parting the crowd like a ship through choppy seas. He found Ellie amidst the turmoil, her paint-splattered clothes a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding them. Their eyes met, a silent agreement passing between them. The chase was far from over. Together, they darted through the mansion's labyrinthine corridors, their footsteps echoing off the marbled floors. They narrowly avoided collisions with bewildered guests, who seemed as much a hazard as the cunning thieves they pursued. Ellie's clumsiness, once a source of personal embarrassment, had become an unexpected asset. Each stumble and misstep sowed confusion among Maximilian's bumbling accomplices, causing them to falter and ultimately fall into Jasper's grasp. Yet, the spotlight of suspicion stubbornly followed Ellie, her frantic attempts to explain only complicating matters. She was caught in a whirlwind where heroism and folly danced a precarious tango, the line between the two blurred beyond recognition. As the chaos reached its crescendo, Ellie paused for a breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Around her, the gala's glittering veneer cracked to reveal the absurd theater of wealth and power beneath. The comedy of errors was more than mere mishap, it was a mirror held up to a society obsessed with appearances. But the night was not yet done with its surprises. Just as Ellie prepared to regroup, a sudden shout echoed from the grand staircase. Maximilian had been spotted, making a desperate bid for escape. The chase resumed, faster, messier, and more chaotic than ever. And through it all, Ellie found herself not just a participant, but the unlikely heroine of this riotous farce. The ballroom fell into a stunned silence for a heartbeat, only to erupt again into laughter and shouts as the next act of this unforeseen comedy unfolded. It was a night that would be remembered, or at least retold with embellishments, for years to come. And at the center of it all was Ellie Harper, the art student who had stumbled headlong into a world far beyond her modest means, and somehow, against all odds, was beginning to find her place within it. But how would she keep her footing as the farce spiraled toward its climax? That, dear reader, was a question for another scene and another stumble. I never thought chasing a self-made billionaire through his own mansion would become the highlight of my night, or frankly, any night. Yet here I was, darting past priceless artworks, dodging chandeliers, and flinging myself through a gauntlet of startled socialites and bumbling henchmen, all while desperately clutching the stolen pocket watch like it was a lifeline. The irony was thick enough to spread on toast. An art student, mistaken for security, now playing cat and mouse with the richest man in the room. The chase kicked off in the grand marble hall, a cathedral of wealth and excess, where every echo of my pounding feet seemed to amplify my nervous heartbeat. I barely avoided smashing into a toppled candelabra, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the gleaming floor. A waiter precariously balancing a champagne tower spun around in surprise, sending a cascade of bubbly droplets splattering like confetti at a particularly uncoordinated parade. The absurdity of it all wasn't lost on me. Here I was, slipping and sliding through the very spectacle of opulence that had initially intimidated me. Maximilian Crane, sleek and smirking, was always just out of reach. A shadow darting through the crowd with that infuriating confidence only billionaires seemed to possess naturally. His tailored suit shimmered under the chandeliers, perfectly pressed and utterly unruffled by the chaos he left in his wake. I wished I could say the same for my paint-splattered clothes and wild hair, which looked like I'd been dragged through a studio explosion rather than a high society gala. The chase led me into a lavish drawing room, where heavy velvet curtains framed a scene worthy of a painting one I could never afford to create but now lived in. The scent of old perfume mingled with the distant strains of a string quartet, creating a bizarrely elegant soundtrack to my pursuit. Maximilian slipped behind a gilded antique desk, his sly smile taunting from the shadows. I could almost hear the silent laughter in the room, the kind that mocks your every misstep, even as you try to keep your footing. In my scramble, I crashed through the curtains with all the grace of a bull in a china shop. Velvet dust puffed into the air, momentarily blurring the scene as I scrambled to regain my balance. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I noted that this was not the subtlety I'd hoped to cultivate as a supposed security guard. Next came the kitchen, a place I wished I'd never seen in such a frantic light. The slippery marble floor turned into a slapstick stage, where I slid past a surprised chef wielding a frying pan like a medieval weapon. The clatter of pots and pans created a cacophony that echoed through the mansion's ornate corridors, punctuating my desperate bid to keep up with Maximilian's swift maneuvers. I was beginning to think this chase would be less about catching a thief and more about surviving a physical comedy sketch gone horribly wrong. But it was on the grand staircase where the chase reached a surreal crescendo. I tripped on an errant rug, arms flailing in a desperate attempt to stay upright. I caught myself just in time, the soft thud of my footsteps barely audible over the hushed murmurs of the gala guests who had gathered to watch the spectacle. Their eyes sparkled with a mix of shock and delight, as if watching a circus performer teeter on the edge of disaster. Somehow, their amusement was oddly encouraging. I realized, amid the adrenaline and the embarrassment, that this ridiculous chase was teaching me something vital. Confidence wasn't about looking flawless or controlling every step. It was about embracing the chaos, falling down, and somehow managing to get back up with a grin. Maximilian's smug expression was no match for my growing resolve. Dodging another of his accomplices who tripped spectacularly over a stray rug, I seized the moment to slip past a heavy mahogany door, slamming it behind me with a satisfying bang. The echo seemed to signal a new chapter in this madcap pursuit. Somewhere deep inside, I felt a flicker of hope that this farce could end with me not just surviving, but winning. As I caught my breath in the shadowed hallway, I couldn't help but wonder what other absurd obstacles awaited me. But one thing was certain, the final chase had begun, and I was determined to see it through, no matter how many pratfalls it took. After all, in a world where mistakes were as common as champagne toasts, perhaps it was the blunders that made heroes after all. And just as I readied myself to step back into the fray, the distant sound of a startled gasp reminded me Maximilian Crane was still out there, and the night was far from over.